Most people remember this movie as a minor remake. They're wrong. This is a bitter, cold-blooded 1953 film noir where nobody is completely innocent and the police are already too late. If you like your film noirs lean, nasty, and quietly unforgiving, you'll want to stick around. So let's start at the beginning. Hello to all the classic people who are returning. I'm glad you're back. I want to welcome any new visitors and let you know that there will be spoilers ahead. Today on Classic Movie Review, we're taking on Vicki, 1953. Today's film is a remake of I Wake Up Screaming 1941, which I've already reviewed and you can check it out with the link in the description. This film has a modest 6.5 rating on imdb.com. On RottenTomatoes.com, the film was savaged with no tomato meter score and only 35% for the audience score. Cranky old New York Times film critic Bosley Carruthers wrote in a September 8, 1953 review, quote, "Meanwhile, the rest of the performers. Jean Peters as the girl who gets killed, Jean Crane as her misgiving sister, Mr. Reed, and several more make the best of Harry Horner's brisk direction to make it look as though they're playing a tingling film. It might be, indeed, if the story were not so studiously contrived and far-fetched." Unquote. I like this film, but not as much as I like I Wake Up Screaming 1941. I think it's Jean Crane, as I feel she comes across haughty or superior in most of her roles. But hey, Jean Peters is amazing. So on we go. I initially slotted this film at 254 on my list of all film noirs. It's a good film and a good film noir, told mostly in flashback. However, it's not as good as I Wake Up Screaming 1941. Thus, the rating is at the bottom of the top 25%. Actors. Jean Peters plays the murdered Vicki Lynn. Most of her story is told in flashback, as with most great film noirs. Peters was first covered in the fantastic film noir Pick Up on South Street 1953, and there's a link in the description. Richard Boone played the driven police lieutenant Ed Cornell. Boone was first covered in the John Wayne extravaganza The Alamo 1960. Max Showalter was cast as editorial columnist Larry Evans. Showalter was born in Kansas in 1917. He came by his interest in acting early, as his mother would take him along when she played the piano for silent movies. Showalter appeared in 92 shows at the Pasadena Playhouse and moved to Broadway shortly after. He began working as a character actor in 1949. While he had some bigger roles, I don't think he would be considered a leading man. His films include big roles in Film Noir's Niagara 1953 and Vicki 1953, both with Jean Peters. He was in another film noir, Naked Alibi 1954, with the great Gloria Graham. He had a role in the war film The Naked and the Dead 1958, Elmer Gantry 1960, and the aviation thriller Fate is the Hunter 1964, and there's a link to the latter. His later work includes playing a reverend in John Derrick's 10 1979. 24 years after Elmer Gantry 1960, he appeared with co-star Edward Andrews as the two grandfathers in the John Hughes directed 16 Candles. And buddy, that film didn't age well. He was also a songwriter and wrote the song Vicki for today's film. Showalter died in 2000. Jean Crane played the role of Jill Lynn. Jill was the level-headed sister of the murdered Vicki. Crane was born in California in 1925. She began acting in junior high and soon caught the bug. Failing on her first screen test after high school, Crane attended UCLA and studied drama. She won the Miss Long Beach Beauty Contest in 1941 and was soon cast in The Gang's All Here 1943. Her early films were hit and miss, but some became quite successful, such as Winged Victory 1944 and State Fair 1945. She played the good sister in the film noir Leave Her to Heaven 1945. In 1949, Crane appeared in A Letter to Three Wives, The Fan, and Pinky. For the latter, she was nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. Crane did a great job as a surprise mother-to-be in People Will Talk 1951, opposite Cary Grant. She did well in today's film Vicki 1953. Crane hit other genres with Western The Fastest Gun Alive 1956 and the film noir The Tattered Dress 1957. She appeared in many television shows. Her final film was the thriller Skyjack 1972. Crane died in 2003. Three guys in the background include future television producer Aaron Spelling as Harry, a desk clerk, Carl Bentz, the dad from the Donna Reed Show, as Detective McDonald, and Mayberry's mayor from the Andy Griffith Show, actor Parley Bear, as an uncredited detective. Story: the nighttime New York skyline is shown. It cuts to billboards, and each shows a picture of Vicki, Jean Peters. The one with her smoking looks like it's right out of Pickup on South Street 1953. The view changes to posters of Vicki being plastered on a wall. Around the corner, a mob of cops, reporters, and bystanders is standing by the entrance of an apartment building. Someone says the model on the 4th floor has been murdered. A female body is rolled out, and the leg tag reads, Vicki Lynn. The credits roll over a painting of Vicki that looks suspiciously like the painting of Laura, Jean Tierney, from Laura, 1944. At the Jersey Shore, Ed Cornell, Richard Boone, exits the taxi and enters a hotel. There are magazines with pictures of Vicki all over the racks. Cornell tells the clerk that he wants peace and quiet to rest. As the world's oldest bellhop, Bert Mustin, comes for the bags, a ream of newspapers is delivered featuring Vicki's picture and the headline, Model Slain. Cornell glances over the story. With a look of disgust, he calls police headquarters in New York. He tells the chief of homicides, John Denner, that he is returning and wants the Lynn case. The chief tries to dissuade him, but Cornell touts his record and is allowed to return from his much-needed vacation. John Denner and Richard Boone have an outside media connection, as Denner was a radio voice of Paladin and Boone played Paladin in the television series Have Gun Will Travel. Back at the station, Cornell looks at images of Vicki and a few people who were in her orbit. Cornell decides Steve Christopher, Elliot Reed, is the killer right then and there. The detectives are already giving Steve the 3rd degree with hot lights, no water, and general rough treatment.
I didn't kill Vicki.
Why did you do it?
You just asked me that.
I will keep on asking.
Cornell joins the investigation and they continue to work on Steve. He denies any wrongdoing. Steve's story begins in flashback. He and columnist Larry Evans, Max Showalter, are coming back from a play. They generally agree that the play was bad. Evans thinks that their friend, actor Robin Ray, Alexander Darcy, should get far away from it. They see a beautiful waitress, Vicki Lynn, Jean Peters, cleaning tables in a cafe.
But the point is, I sold him to the public and they'll go and see him. They like to see famous people.
Whereas me, sometimes I like to look at a completely new person. Nice. Coffee.
They enter for coffee. All the time, Steve says that his job as a promoter will keep Robin's show going even though it's bad. Vicki is friendly to the duo and they tell her she could be big. She says she has no talent or ambition. Steve gives Vicki his office address. He says that Vicki came to his office the next morning brimming with ambition. That night, he takes her to a fancy nightclub to be seen by high society. Vicki has been given the Eliza Doolittle makeover routine. Evans comes in and says he knows Vicki and she will appear in his newspaper column the next day. Robin comes in and immediately starts making moves on Vicki. Steve takes her away by dancing with her, and on the dance floor they work out their plan. Steve and Evans walk Vicki back to her apartment. The desk clerk, Harry, Aaron Spelling, is rude to Vicki and Steve gets hostile. Robin shows up having followed the bunch. Vicki won't let them go up because she shares an apartment with her sister, Jill, Jean Crane. Harry gives Vicki the stink eye as she enters the elevator. Steve has another spat with Harry on the way out. Back at the police station interrogation, they're giving Steve a hard time about being rough with Harry. Cornell continues to give Steve the business, but the suspect maintains he is innocent. In another part of the jail, they are interviewing Jill about her sister, but they are much nicer to her. They finally begin to ask her about Steve. Jill flashes back to the night Vicki returned from her first outing with Steve and company. Jill can't believe how head over heels Vicki is for a new life. Jill is very concerned about Steve's motivation. In the morning, Steve comes to the apartment and Jill is pretty rude to him. He shows her the newspaper coverage about her sister. When Vicki sees the paper, she is swept up. Jill continues to describe Vicki's rise from poster girl to club singer. She continues that after about 2 months, Vicki accused Jill of being in love with Steve.
Why should there be fireworks? They've got nothing to beef about, Steve especially.
Why not let Steve decide that when he gets here?
I don't see why you're taking Steve's side.
Unless what?
Unless maybe you're in love with him.
One night, Vicki drops a bomb on Steve and company, telling them she is heading to Hollywood after having already successfully taken a screen test. The guys are bummed, but Vicki doesn't understand why. She won't even honor the contract Steve has already signed for her. In the interview room, Steve says that he was mad but didn't kill Vicki. Sometime after Vicki delivered the news, Steve, Evans, and Robin go drinking. They find that they all have the same engraved penknife from Vicki. During her interrogation, Jill describes an odd man watching Vicki through the cafe window. The man is shown to be Lieutenant Ed Cornell. Vicki is not worried, and Jill says she saw the man on several other occasions watching her sister. The detectives then accuse her of killing Vicki to get Steve for herself.
Why are you trying to protect Steve Christopher?
Protect? I'm not trying to protect him or anybody. Why should I?
You were in love with him, weren't you?
It's a lie.
So much in love with him you couldn't see straight. Only he didn't give you a tumble, isn't that right?
They have Cornell come into Jill's interrogation. She is shocked to see that he is the man who was watching her sister. Cornell admits that he was watching her because it was his district and job. Cornell asks about the final meeting between Vicki, Jill, and Steve. They went for a drive. What a cheap date. On the drive, Vicki asks Steve to drive her to the airport the next day. Finally, Vicki alludes to Jill's love for Steve. Her phrasing was something like, "You'll be glad to get rid of me." Around 5 p.m. the next day, Jill arrives at her apartment. Music is playing loudly, and Steve is kneeling over Vicki's dead body. Jill calls the police. Cornell goes back to Steve and asks about the "you will be glad to get rid of me" line. He then accuses Steve of murder before physically attacking him. They pull him off, and then the chief requests that Steve be sent to his office. Cornell is sure Steve is guilty. Jill is in the chief's office already, and the chief apologizes for the arrest. He says they now believe the killer is Harry, the desk clerk. Harry has been missing since the time of the murder. Outside, Steve chases Jill down, but she wants nothing to do with a man who was accused of killing her sister. Steve has a fitful sleep and wakes up to find Cornell in his room staring at him. Steve orders him out, but Cornell is calm and shows evidence that he found a cigarette butt of Steve's brand in Vicki's closet. Cornell says he has never made a mistake and that they are wrong about Harry being the killer. Later, the chief brings in Cornell for a butt chewing. The chief says Harry is no longer a suspect and that Cornell is nowhere on the case. Cornell is still locked in on Steve as the murderer. The chief insists that they bring in Robin and Evans. Cornell says not to bring in Evans because his newspaper column is too powerful. Robin is terrified when he is brought in for questioning. Robin and Steve are brought into a dark room and are shown a film of Vicki singing. Robin demands that they stop the film. The chief has him brought into his office. Robin says that he fell in love with Vicki. He told her, and she laughed at him. Ow! Cornell already has an alibi for Robin, as Robin was with another woman at the time of the murder. Cornell tells Steve he is still it. Both men are released. Jill returns to her apartment, and no one is at the desk. She finds the door to her apartment open, and Harry is inside packing Vicki's clothes. That's not creepy. Jill is horrified. Harry says that he was visiting with his parents for a couple of days, and the police said he was no longer a suspect. Steve calls for Jill, but Harry gives him the brush at Jill's request. Harry almost steps on a doll he dropped and then becomes really weird. At her new apartment, Jill sorts through Vicki's things. She finds a note to Vicki written on Steve's paper that says, quote, "After the way you acted last night, the sooner you're out of the way, the better," unquote. The doorbell rings and Jill hides the note in a book. It's Cornell at the door. Jill tries to prevent him from entering, but she can't. Cornell reacts oddly to the doll from before. He accuses Jill of hiding information about Steve because she's in love with him. When Cornell leaves, Jill calls Steve and sets up a meet for that night at her apartment. As they head out, posters of Vicki are plastered on the walls. Cornell is hiding around the corner watching the pair. Steve and Jill go dancing. She asks him if he was in love with Vicki, and he says he was not. He asks Jill to trust him and says he feels bad for pushing Vicki into the business so quickly. Jill tells Steve about the note and takes it back to her apartment where she shows it to him. As soon as the note is in Steve's hand, Cornell comes through the door and takes the note. Cornell cuffs Steve at gunpoint. He then gives Steve a beating. Real tough guy beating up somebody in handcuffs. Cornell shows some brass knuckles that he claims came from Steve's apartment. Cornell is about to hit Steve with the brass knuckles, but Jill clubs him over the head to stop the attack. Jill and Steve go to the roof and escape the police who are surrounding the building. Steve says he will spend the night in an all-night movie. Jill and Steve admit they are in love and kiss. Steve asks Jill to meet him at a repair shop so he can cut the handcuffs off. Cornell wakes from the knock on the head and calls in an all-points bulletin for Steve. Cornell and some other cops arrest Jill outside the repair shop. The cops don't find Steve, who is hiding under a car. When they're gone, he goes inside and eventually cuts the handcuffs off with a hacksaw. Cornell encourages the other cops to shoot Steve if they get a chance. Cornell then leaves for his home. On the way, he walks by the cafe where Vicki used to work. He looks in the window and seems nostalgic. In the morning, Cornell decides to use a butterfly collecting technique, releasing a female to lead them to the male. He has Jill turn loose against the advice of Detective McDonald. Jill goes home and Cornell is watching from outside. She finds a letter from the Rosedale Cemetery along with the cards from the flowers that were delivered to Vicki's grave. They say things like, "Until tomorrow," and "Because I promised." Jill heads across the rooftop and goes to find Steve in the all-night theater. More about this in the conclusion. She finds Steve and he says that he has seen the movie 4 times and the butler was the killer.
Then why?
Steve, I was so afraid I wouldn't find you.
Sure glad you did. Seen this picture 4 times. You know who killed Lady Battersley? The butler.
Of course, this is a gag line associated with those big cast whodunit mysteries where no one suspects the butler until the reveal. After Steve reads the flower cards, he says that "Until tomorrow" is how Evans signs off his newspaper column. Steve goes into Evans's apartment and asks about the flowers. Evans tries to pull a gun on Steve, but Steve gets the drop on him. In a mini flashback, Evans says that he was with Vicki on the day of the murder and she left her key behind in the apartment. He and her went back to the apartment building, but all of the keys were missing, as was the desk clerk, Harry. Evans climbs the fire escape and opens the apartment for Vicki. He quickly lets her inside and she flirts with him. She asks if he will soon forget her. He says he will remember her for 2 weeks and send flowers every day for 14 days. She makes him promise. Evans leaves, and as he goes, the door to the closet opens from the inside by an unseen person. Back in current times, Evans finishes his story. Steve questions him further and learns that Harry was not at the desk when he left and that the bedroom smelled of cigarette smoke. Steve remembers that Jill found a burning cigarette in the ashtray when she went back to get Vicki's things. In an alley, Steve surprises Detective McDonald by poking a gun in his back. Steve tells the detective he needs just half an hour and surrenders the gun. Harry is asleep at the desk. The switchboard buzzes and the female voice on the end of the line says it's Vicki and asks Harry why he killed her and if he loved her. He hangs up, but the female keeps calling back.
Vicki, why did you do it, Harry? Didn't you love me? Tell Vicki. Please tell Vicki.
Steve runs in and confronts Harry. He runs down the entire story. Finally, Harry confesses. Harry tells that he confessed to Cornell and was told to forget about it and go back to work. Detective McDonald arrests Harry. Jill was the one making the calls from her former apartment. Steve asks for 5 minutes with Detective Cornell, and Detective McDonald agrees. Really? Cornell arrives at his apartment carrying flowers. Steve knocks the cop down and pushes him inside. The apartment is a shrine to Vicki with flowers, candles, memorabilia, and pictures. Cornell is moving like a zombie. He takes a small pill. He says he went after Steve because Steve is the one that really took Vicki away from him.
Vicki was dead for me from the time you set eyes on her. You're the one who really killed her. You're the one who took her away from me, not him.
But that was only in Cornell's fantasy world. Cornell had had 1 cup of coffee with Vicki. He then found an apartment and planned to marry her. Of course, Vicki didn't feel the same way. Steve said Vicki called him a vulture. Cornell tries to taunt Steve into shooting him, but he won't. Jill comes in with Detective McDonald, who takes Cornell into custody. Jill and Steve walk down the street and kiss. Vicki's posters are being removed as the world moves on to the next thing. Conclusion, my pet peeve. Those crimes like fleeing the police, sawing off handcuffs, sticking a gun in the back of a detective's coat, you're going to pay for them. You're not going to get to walk away free. They're going to charge you for all those crimes, even though you were innocent of the murder. The movie that Steve was watching when Jill found him was Laura, 1944. Like today's film, Laura, 1944, Also features a cop investigating the murder of a woman with a single first name as the title. The investigation looks into her group of male friends, and one of them was also a newspaper columnist who promoted people. He also used his column to destroy careers. That's a great movie and well worth watching. So link below. For a bit of connection, Jill, Jean Crane, enters the theater where Laura, 1944, featuring Dana Andrews and Gene Tierney, is playing. Crane appeared in 4 movies with Andrews, who also appeared in 5 movies with Tierney. In I Wake Up Screaming, 1941, Frankie Christopher, Victor Mature, shows his connection with the local street area, and it seems more likely that he would know where he could cut off a pair of handcuffs. Steve Christopher, Elliot Reed, was not given a background like that. In I Wake Up Screaming, 1941, Detective Ed Cornell, Laird Krieger, came across as much creepier and more menacing than Lieutenant Ed Cornell, Richard Boone. Also, Boone's character took the pill, as did Krieger's character. However, Krieger's suicide was shown, and Boone lived to get arrested. All in all, Vicki 1953 is good, but I Wake Up Screaming 1941 is a much better film and is a strong contender for the title of the first classic film noir. In the past, movies would show over and over in a theater. You could pay for a ticket and you could sit in there as long as you want. Watch it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. If you missed the beginning, you could stay and watch the beginning again. They ran back to back. I called those the good old days. My parents, they called that babysitting. For a quarter, you could be sent to a matinee double feature, 4 hours, watch it twice. If you were lucky, you got a nickel to buy one of those giant pickles from the concession stand. Man, that's what I call the good old days. That's babysitting, baby. World famous short summary, the roommate swap, is it possible? Thank you for taking the time to listen. If you want more, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and ring the bell.